Well, here we are at our Growth Multiplier gathering, Growth Multiplier Mindset Part 2. We're excited you guys are here. And, our commitment is to show up and to impact, to teach, to deliver, to share, to let you know if you were here with us for a minute while we were kicking off that you're not alone, even though it feels that way when you're trying to make change and grow. And so my name is Chris, for those of you that may not know. And my passion, obsession, how leaders grow and develop. Had the privilege to meet Jimmy last year. And as we began to deepen our relationship, what grew out of that was Growth Multiplier. And Growth Multiplier is where we come beside companies and leaders of serious responsibility and help them move as far as they can, get to the edge of their abilities and expand. And it's our conviction through the leaders and business owners that we coach, teach, train, and lead that there's never been a greater time to expand. In crisis is where you see a lot of advancement happen. And so passion and privilege for us to be here today. We're glad you're here. Maybe, Jimmy, just intro yourself for a minute here. Let us know a little bit about you, and then I'll set us up for today.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here. A little bit about me. Been doing this for about 28 years or so. That is helping folks build high-performing, high-growth organizations. Always learning, always adapting and adapting what I've learned to the current situation, which is something we're all doing right now, given the environment that we're operating in. And I just cannot wait to talk more about the topic today, mindset, and how leaders can cultivate a mindset that can help them not only deal with today, but extend the wins that they achieve today into the future.
Awesome. And I'm excited for what you're going to share. I know a little bit of it, and I'm glad to experience it fresh, and we're going to ask questions, and I won't hold back on that, as we've discussed. But what we talked about in session 1 was that growth is the mastery of change, that change, you can't stop it, you can't control it, you cooperate with it. And when you cooperate with it, that's how you master change. That's how it surfaces the growth in you. And we walked you through a paradigm and a template to understand, where are you right now? What's happening? What's the season of your business? What we want to do is add part 2 to that. And the part 2 to that is what it means to have the growth multiplier mindset. What's happening in your head? And I think about that saying, rinse do for what happens here all the time. What's happening in your head in regards to your leadership and how you're showing up? And what Jimmy's going to share with you is this skipped over essential piece. And it fits so much with what we were talking about even before we got kicked off on leaders and how they can feel alone. But the ultimate mindset is to know they're not alone. And so what do we need to know, do, and experience if we're going to be those leaders that have the growth multiplier mindset?
Right. Right. So it's an exciting topic. And what we talked about last time is this idea of the leader leading themselves first. Today, the mindset challenge for us is, well, without a team, what is a leader? So after the leader thinks about leading him or herself first, they have to point their attention to the team. And what's really interesting is it's not just about the team. The measure for most of us of a successful leader is fielding one or more high-performing teams. So let's talk about high performance in the context of the team that we are leading, and what kind of mindset do we have to bring to the table. What's really interesting is that when we think of teams if we think of a team as a group of people working toward a shared task or vision, that's really not enough. We have to think about that team in the context of the leverage they create. Leverage is the ultimate growth multiplier, and it is really the only reason to go through the effort of developing and building a team. It's the idea that the sum of the parts are worth more, or bring more value, or generate more value than each of those individual parts do alone. Because if the team comes together and only creates as much value as the individuals can on their own, what's the point of the team? What's the point of bringing that leader or having that leader on board? So when we think about building a team, our mindset has to be in that place of leverage. Am I getting maximum leverage out of the union that I'm creating with these people? Unfortunately today, because leverage really isn't on the minds of leaders and generating this multiplier effect really isn't foremost in their minds, we're not practicing as leaders the disciplines required to cultivate that leadership. And how do we know? Well, we do research. And there's a lot of research out there about how teams are underperforming today. As many as 60% of executive level leaders believe that their teams are underperforming at any one point in time. We have data that suggests that up to 70% of project-based teams fail to deliver on their objectives. And so instead of building high-performing teams, what we see is that most leaders build groups of people that are more reflective of gangs or cliques than teams that are well-functioning. What do I mean by a gang or a clique? A gang or a clique is a group of people that are not there to deliver on the shared vision the leader brings to the table. They are simply highly self-involved. They're invested in their own objectives, and they're only part of the group looking for what other members of the group can deliver to them. So it's a purely selfish intent. And it's one where we're focused as members of this group on remaining separate. We cultivate exclusivity. We focus on our ego and how we feel about being part of the team, and we depend upon that team to boost our ego. And as soon as those members of that group or team can't deliver on that, we exit. And again, with no attachment to the unifying or shared vision that leader brings to the table. So having invested 28 years in building teams and developing teams and rebuilding teams, the research that I've done and the experience that I've had has led me to 4 levers of a high-performing team. And I think that's something we should talk about today. We think of this in the context of the team circle and how those 4 levers work together. So, Chris, with your permission, I'll get into those 4 levers. But before I do, any comments from you about how I've positioned this? Is how I position this, for example, true for you and true for the experiences you've had working with leaders?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like I've seen in my own leadership experience the dysfunctional young leader that doesn't know the power of a team and doesn't know how to build a team. So I was like 25 years old, leading way too many people. I had like 12 direct reports, and they didn't know how to build a team. And I could lead circles around them because of that skill. It was wild to me to see leaders that were decades in their leadership not multiplying themselves using that leverage. I'm curious to ask, though, just real quick, and I don't want to take you off with this, what was a tipping point for you to help you see? What was a pain point you experienced that you went, whoa, this is so important and I've been skipping over it? Or did you just have it from birth?
No, it's like the most humbling experience for a leader. I had, as you know, back in maybe 14, 15 years ago, I had a professional event occur that motivated me to hire a life coach, and it was a relationship I had for about 10 years. And if you think about having a coach working on you 3 sessions a month for that kind of time, you learn a lot. But what really one of the things that drove me to this was I got really tired of sitting back in my chair as a leader, wondering and, saying to myself in my head and sometimes out loud, what's wrong with these people, right? How come they're not more motivated? How come they don't listen to me? How come it's so hard for me to move these people toward action? Why is it they're not invested in the same vision that I have? How come it's so hard for me to get them to complete expense reports? Why is it so hard to get them to provide data that we can use to move this team? Don't they care about this organization and the vision that we are all moving toward in the same way I do? I imagine many of the folks that are listening today feel and have felt the same way about the folks that they work with. For many of us who've actually heard a leader lament this, how many of us would have liked to have pulled a mirror out of our back pocket and just stuck it in front of that leader's face and say, guess what? All you have to do is look in the mirror to figure out the answers to your questions. So without being specific, because there are probably too many instances that I can bring up, Chris, that exemplify this, that was really it for me. I got tired of asking those questions or that question over and over again. What's wrong with these people? I found my coach, not because I recognized that was the answer the question that I had to answer. I discovered that was really where I needed to focus once I started working with my coach. And ever since then, what I've learned is that anytime there's friction in my life, or that I experience or feel friction emotionally, or see it happen in front of me, the first place I have to look is at myself. What am I not getting? What am I not seeing? What am I not understanding?
I love that, because that's the opposite that we see so often modeled, which is blaming it on, the market, blaming it on a condition. And when we have the mindset that says, the growth multiplier mindset, it starts inside before it's outside, everything becomes an opportunity for us. And so for you, what I'm hearing you say is it was learned the hard way. It was the pain, which I believe is for sure the best path of wisdom. I want to accelerate my learning. I want to experience the least amount of pain possible. But I also know that you can read leadership book after leadership book after leadership book and
Right.
not ever be transformed. And as you went through this transformation, you said there were 4 levers that you found that were so critical to having this team mindset. How did you come to this idea that there's 4 pieces? Like you randomly picked 12 and then you whittled it down, you threw darts at it. What was that like for you?
Well, I think, once you recognize that improvement or change has to start with you as the leader, and you do what we suggested last time we spoke, lead yourself first, right? You've got to think about, okay, great. Now that I have this awareness, what do I do with it? This idea of leverage became the initial focus. If I'm putting people together, and I thought of it really more as an economic situation, recognizing if I'm going to invest in employees and bring them together and ask them to go through the challenge of getting to know each other, figuring out how to work well together, struggle with the personalities and everything else that's in play, and how are we going to make this happen? It had to be a relationship that created leverage. I also recognized that if my goal was to be a champion, was to build a high-performing team, I had to be a high performer, right? It's very rare, it's very rare for a B leader to build an A team. It's next to impossible to sustain that over time. So I also recognized that it really was about me getting better, and not about me learning about where I could improve so I could tell people what they were doing wrong. It was so that I could exemplify or model the behavior that would generate the leverage with that first team member that I could impact, and then allow them to impact their peers, so that together we could, all be invested in generating that leverage. So for me, it was a natural idea to think about leverage as the point to focus. And now couple decades or 3 decades later, we're now talking about this idea in the context of being a growth multiplier, where now wherever we go, we are thinking about how do we show up and immediately generate and sustain that level of leverage with the people that we're working with, and then thereby becoming that growth multiplier. So it's incredibly profound. And there's almost nowhere that this works better than when you have someone who is focused on working with customers, folks who are not obligated to be part of your organization or your team. They're there as volunteers. How do we meet a customer or a prospect and turn them into someone, member of the team for whom we are generating leverage, for whom we are having a multiplier effect? So we've experimented with this and applied this across several applications of the concept of team, and it's worked really, really well.
So I want to pause right there because I want you to get to these 4 levers, but I think just to help people feel, see, and hear the expansiveness with which you've applied it, just at a high level bullet point, as fast as you can, hit some of the industries, size of companies, teams that you've implemented this with, just to see the breadth of that.
Well, so think about so I was coming up in the 90s, and I was highly invested in the venture-backed internet bubble. So for 15 years, I was involved in those kinds of organizations. So think about organizations where the teams come together quickly, right? We don't have 15 or 20 years to get to know each other, build institutional knowledge, become attached to our organization, and then simply move around and recreate a team that's going to focus on a project and make something happen. These are organizations that are put together quickly. Typically, the leaders are there because they want to achieve a life-changing event, an exit, where they imagine themselves retired in 5 years or 10 years, living on a beach, and that's it. So the motivations tend to be very self-focused. The environments are put together very quickly. Most people are there for very selfish reasons, life-changing money, and they forget about the fact that they have to come together and actually produce something. So those are highly charged environments where the team concept and this idea of generating leverage between all of these type A personalities that have to figure out how to work together and create something more than just what they can bring to the table. Very challenging, not always successful, but a great proving ground for these kinds of concepts. And so this idea of creating a shared vision with these kinds of people wasn't tough. It was getting them all to walk a shared path to change that was tough. How do you, as a leader, impress upon them your ability to actually show them the way? Very challenging. And then, of course, today we're working with mid-market and large organizations. We have a large global OEM manufacturer working with insurance agencies, insurance brokers and providers across industries, construction, et cetera. Whether it's product-based manufacturer that has maybe 60 offices around the globe, all serving different cultures and environments, all selling essentially the same stuff. How do you translate this across those types of environments? What we had to come up with was a concept that could be easily translated from culture to culture. This idea of leverage is as old as time, the idea of a lever, right, that can allow you to take a little bit of effort to produce a huge outcome. And this idea of growth and becoming a growth multiplier. Anybody who wants to achieve more than they have today or lead a championship organization is going to be thinking about growth and being that kind of a growth multiplier. So what we have is a universal framework that can be communicated across cultures in any size of organization and at any level of their growth trajectory or business life cycle.
I love it because that's where the wisdom is. Like that high level, it maps, it customizes. That's why when you and I met, I was like, our stuff syncs up because it's how the world works. Like at this
Right.
high level. So talk us through these four levers because I got a bunch of questions I want to ask you around
Okay.
them. You don't even know what's cooking up in my head right now, so be nervous. No, uh,
Okay.
the walk us through those four levers, and I know you've already hinted at the first one, so that people can have that as a tool. And I know that you won't be able to go into depth, obviously, like you could if you had a chunk of time.
And I will. And what I would like the listeners to think about is that I don't, oftentimes we have this anticipation for what we're going to hear and learn. And then as soon as we hear a word or a concept that we think we understand, we
Mm-hmm.
shut our brains off and we stop listening. What I'm going to do is express these four levers in terms that are familiar to everyone so that the leap to understanding the concepts isn't huge. So don't stop listening when you hear words you already understand and know. We'll get deeper and talk about what makes this model so effective. So if you think about a circle, the North Star of the circle is this concept of vision. So when we're thinking about creating leverage across a team, that first lever has to be a vision that the leader brings to the table. This is what puts the leader in the driver's seat of that team. Um, it gives the team something to organize themselves around. So we have to have a vision that we can share across the team that gives us all that North Star to focus on. And then we have to, of course, generate that shared path to change. So the vision and the shared vision and the shared path. The real important thing here is to let go of this ridiculous notion that there is no I in team. A long time ago, I thought about that. I said, yeah, but there is a me in team. And if you jumble the letters around, you can spell the word me. It is totally unrealistic for us to expect that a team will be built and that we as members will work our asses off to create the amount of leverage required to achieve the leader's vision if there isn't something in it for us. So a team has to focus on this mutuality around this, just like you talk about cooperation. There's a cooperation that we're going to achieve together toward achieving the vision, but that leader also has to recognize that I'm there for a reason. So it's a shared vision. So the leader has to be interested in and curious about why I'm there as a team member. What's in it for me to help the team member get there? The leader get to where he or she wants to go. It's unrealistic for a leader to show up and command this undying respect and dedication to a vision that doesn't really matter to me as a team member. So, and by the way, this focus on shared vision and a mutual commitment, that is what cultivates the trust and respect that leader will require, right? To get me as a member of that team to buy in fully and put the energy that's going to be required to create the leverage necessary to get to where we want to go. Not just for the sake of the next easiest goal to get to, but for the sake of achieving that long-term vision. That's
Yeah.
number
What
one.
it makes me think of the tension point between the East and the West. The West is all about the individual, the I. The East is all about the we. And if we work with somebody that comes out of a Western context and they get really lit up on the we of the Eastern, or you can work with people from an Eastern context and they're all fired up about the I in the Western context. And it's this both and reality, which is why it's the mindset. It's not a mindset of me. It's not a mindset of we. It's a mindset of me and we. And yeah, I love it. So
Right.
adding an exclamation mark to what you've seen on that. What's the second lever?
So after vision, right, now we're thinking about the mechanics of a team. I'll share all three and then go through them one by one. We have to think about the structure of the team, then the roles that each team member are going to play, and then the people on that team. So the 4 levers altogether: vision, structure, roles, and people. And if you want to use a familiar analogy, you can think of the analogy of the right people in the right seats on the right bus, right? Well, think of the vision as being the driver of the bus. Think of structure being the bus. Think of the roles being the seats, and then think of people being the people, right? Every member of your team is sitting in a seat. They are playing a role, and they're on a bus that represents the structure, the correct structure for us to achieve our vision. And we're all putting our faith in the driver, right? The vision. What's interesting about this analogy is that when I speak to leaders who are taught this analogy, right people, right seats, right bus, most of the time, 90% of the time, and I'd love feedback from our audience, those leaders only think of the people on the bus as being the variable. It's the default response, the default reaction. Oh, I just got to change people out, or I have to invest in training and develop those folks. Mm-hmm. Well, how sure are you that the role design is appropriate for today? Great analogy is this idea that when a team or an organization is formed, so go back to the days of working in venture-backed startups or in a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, roles are built, and it's a painful exercise. And most hiring managers hate the idea of creating a role. So what do? They go on the internet and they steal a job description from someplace, they put it in place, and they hire people. Even if you went through the effort of investing in a properly designed role, over time, that role changes. The actual work the people in those roles do over time looks nothing like what the role design says it should. And so what happens is we create a disconnect between the people that we have on our team and the role that they're actually playing. Now, why does this happen? Because we hire great people. We say to them, hey, do you think you could do this? Do you think you could do that? Could you solve this problem as well? They're amazing, great folks, and leaders take the easy approach and say, yes, this is going to be a diversion from why I hired you, but you're competent enough to do this. Can you take this on for me? And so what those people are taking on now moves them further and further away from the role that they're designed to play. What's wrong with that? Well, now you have a gap, you have an unknown that exists between the larger strategy that you created and how it's being executed. And really what was in place here is that you have no idea how you're being successful, why you're being successful, because you have no idea how to replicate it, because you have not documented the shifts in the actual work you have these people do by updating their role and then refitting it into the structure that you've built for the organization and seeing what kind of dynamics now have to change for the structure and then realigning that with your vision. And so over time, what happens is we get these gaps in structure, the roles, and in the work that our people are doing. And those gaps create a disconnect between our strategy and what's happening day to day. And now the leader has really no idea how to generate predictable, repeatable outcomes. And they actually lose their ability to create the leverage that they need to produce a high performing team.
How do you, because I hear that, I appreciate it, but I naturally, as a leader, I take that for granted. So I'm like, hey, no, you take care of like the vision and you just get going. You're going to get all that stuff figured out as you go. And I can imagine, and you and I both know this from coaching and working with them, that visionary high energy leader hears what you're saying. They agree with it. They start to check out a little bit and go, I just delegate that. It's not super critical.
Right.
How do you bring a leader in on really owning and valuing how critical this is as a lever? If it's a lever, it's powerful, right?
Right. Well, so the first thing is this does not work with leaders for whom good enough is good enough. Now, I am not judging anyone who just wants to chill and maintain. God bless you. If that's what you want, go for it. Why would they go through the effort of looking for ways to create leverage? Why would they go through the pain of change, right? So the first thing we have to do is make sure we're working with a leader who's going to welcome the challenge in front of them, right? So we tend to want to work with people that have this big vision, or are compelled to explore their potential. People that want to reach and redefine their potential over time. If there's that level of curiosity and that level of energy behind it, then it's really easy to introduce a new framework. Why do I talk about this? Why do I think that this level of energy is so important? Because what we're doing here essentially, Chris, is we're introducing to the leader skills and responsibilities and new habits that at that moment in time they don't have, right? But those habits and those skills and competencies are going to get them where they want to go. So there is going to be an investment in adapting and adopting this stuff and making it part of the new normal for that leader. And for anyone who wants to understand what do you mean new normal, just think about yourselves and what you've gone through the last 3 or 4 months, getting used to this new normal, right? The new normal that we're all going through. So, we're gonna introduce this idea of, do you have a really well-framed and well-formed vision? So have you taken the direction you want to take your team in or your organization in? And have you created a very specific vision for the organization? Something that that creates energy, that can help you create energy and excitement. And we're not talking about something that everyone's going to buy into. This is something that you are sincerely focused on creating, because at the end of the day, you're not creating a vision based on consensus. You're creating a vision that you are now going to assemble a team around. So can you create that vision? Then this next idea is structure. So transforming that vision now into goals. And we have to build a team now that can deliver on those goals. So what's an example of structure? You can think of organizational structure, but let's think of something smaller, a structure that you might build around a team. There are teams that are manager-led, right? Where the manager sets the goals, calls the plays, and then directs the team to execute. So that might be an appropriate structure for that team based on the vision that you have set forth. Another structure might be self-managed teams, where the leader has more of a hands-off approach. So they set the goals and expectations, but the players call the plays and execute. And then you've got other structures that maybe leverage distributed teams or virtual teams. And then maybe there are folks that are involved in cross-functional teams, typically innovation or product development teams who need specialized disciplines from across the organization to come together and work together. So this is what I mean by structure. And then you have to think about how that group is organized. What's the chain of accountability going to be like? Segmentation of roles and responsibilities, centralization of decision-making, all that stuff. So it can get fairly detailed and complex, but these are things that we have to think about ahead of time. Why? So that we can check our execution against the standard that we've set and make sure that we're on track.
Yeah. Well, and you just said distributed and virtual teams, and I can't think of a more pressing
Right.
situation. And I think a lot of organizations are going to be caught sleepy on this third, fourth quarter this year, depending on what happens, second wave, all that. Distributed virtual teams, right? So now they're feeling the weight of what you're saying, because they're having to rethink through the structure. I could geek out on this with you for too long. What would be a top 1 or 2 things you would say for distributed or virtual teams that they need to really pay attention to use what you're sharing here, this idea of structure as a leverage?
Yeah. So this idea. I like to use this easy to remember rhyme, right? Leaders know the way, go the way, and show the way, right? So
Thanks, John Maxwell.
I'm not even sure where that came from.
Who knows?
Old as dirt, right? So I mean, I've seen that forever, but I've applied it in so many places, and it's so true. So think about in the context of virtual teams today. Think about you as a leader. Again, back to my example. Whenever you experience friction, look in the mirror. So the friction that we experience as leaders, I can't possibly impact my team if I'm not in front of them, if I'm not face to face, if we're not in the same office, if I can't look over their shoulders, if I can't make sure that they're at their desk. All of these crutches and frankly, these lies that we tell ourselves, just because someone's sitting at a desk doesn't mean they're working, doesn't mean they're productive. I can't tell you the number of stories that I've heard from folks from small and large organizations, organizations as large as Comcast, for example, where managers have said, my team has never been more productive. Now, this leader has never felt more friction and stress just in the context of managing this new normal. But when she looks at the numbers, she's like, shit, my people have never been more productive. So what's more true, the evidence or the feeling that I have that I can't be effective if I'm not there face to face? And then think about how this reflects on your sales and customer facing teams. Think about how this reflects on other folks who feel like they need, but don't really need to be in front of a customer or in front of somebody to have an impact. So all we can do at that point is simply understand, get past the biases we built over the years, look at the evidence, and then be prepared to accept that evidence.
Yeah, I love that. We need to create a resource on how working from home removes unnecessary crutches to these 4 levers, because you think you see them working and that your structure and roles and people are in place and they're following the vision, that all 4 of these levers are there, when in reality, it's a bunch of commotion that's a distraction. So I'm just noting that out loud for us, that I think there's a lot, because every struggle becomes an opportunity. That's awesome. So I just want to exclamation mark that for everyone to really hear that. Like, the shift to distributed teams, to virtual teams, is an opportunity to get these pieces tighter, because they're not location specific. You don't have to be in the same room. That's awesome. Right. So what's next? Next lever. Take us there.
We talked about right driver, right, through vision, the right bus, which is the vehicle, the structure that we're now going to build for this team. And then you got to think about the right seats, or the roles that your people are eventually going to sit in. So the way to ensure this structure is going to work is to think about moving from, so we moved from vision to goals in the context of structure. Let's move from goals to strategy and think about the right roles. What do I mean? In any organization that has to get things done, they have the opportunity, for example, to think about, do I want to hire a role player who's a generalist or a role player who's a specialist? So if they're a specialist, I have to hire more people to get a job done. If I hire a generalist, maybe I have to hire one who can do all of that stuff reasonably well. So that's an example of thinking about roles in the context of executing that strategy to achieve, to sustain the structure and achieve the vision that we have set. The interesting thing is that role design you can look at it as a science, or you can look at it as a throwaway concept. Whatever I can get on paper to get somebody in a seat so I can get them to work. We like to think about role design as incredibly important. Why? As a lever point, think about this. Think about designing a role, or worse, think about having a role that you have no idea what's required to be successful in that role. And then think about trying to find someone to play that role. What do you want to be true? That you have no idea what are the most predictive tasks competencies and responsibilities that you can combine in that role that would be predictive of success? Do you not want to have that information, or do you? Is it worth the effort or isn't it? Depends on how big your vision is. We suggest it's very important to invest some time and effort, not a huge amount of time, but some time and effort understanding what tasks, responsibilities, competencies are most predictive of success in that role. Now, that's great knowledge. What do you do with it? Well, I use that to map it to the right person, the person who has or can develop the predictive tasks, competencies, and responsibilities. When I put the two together, I get magic. I get maximum leverage. So you cannot have the right people sitting in a seat unless you understand the definition of that person by first defining the role or optimizing that seat.
When have you seen this done so poorly it stands out just as a dramatic, aberration of a ruined opportunity, just to make it real?
Well, I mean, everybody on the conference call today, who's hired people, understands the draw, the bright, shiny object that is to hire someone that you think you know, or a friend, or somebody you had a long relationship with, somebody who's referred to you.
Family member in the business. Come on.
Right. Family member, somebody that you just, get and they get you. Too many times we hire based on the warm and fuzzy feeling that the potential this relationship brings to us. And so those hiring decisions are, they're not based on data. They're not based on evidence. They're based on feelings. Now, there are a lot of leaders out there who lie to themselves and convince themselves that they're a great judge of character and they pick great people. When you look at the data, and we've done this, for decades, we've looked at the data. At best, those managers, those leaders, over time, they're lucky if they're batting 50%. Now, to win, to win at craps, you got to be like a little bit better than 48%. So maybe they're good enough to win at craps long term, but they're not good enough to win in business. If you think about the gap between being 50% right and maybe being 90% right. Now, what stops a leader from investing in being 90% right? It's mindset. It's a belief system that says it's impossible. I've never seen anyone hire and place leaders at a 90% rate. Well, we know recruiters who have a discipline that works and they're batting 99%, right? And we're talking about hiring people for roles and then expecting those people to perform to be high performers, meaning they're going to perform at in the top half of all the people in those roles within the first year. So not only are we going to hire them and they're going to be retained, but they're going to be activated to the point where they become a top performer within the first year.
Yeah.
And
all because go ahead. Sorry.
No, we can do that at a 90% rate. Yeah. But it takes a leader, a client, who is willing to believe it. It can happen.
Yeah. Well, and I love the way that you'll use this phrase, do it in any economy. People get inspired right now, like innovations that happen when the market is experiencing severe disruption. It's true. It'll always be true. There are people crazy out there like me and you who do new things at a time people would say you shouldn't do a new thing. But we've seen these patterns play out so much. And, I know when I'm sitting with a business owner or we're working with a business owner and we get under the hood and it's really fast. Do they have a vision? Right. And then it's really crazy to me on your structure point. How weirdly creative are they trying to be with their structure? Because visionary leaders tend to think that they can do something in a way that they don't need a box, but they don't know how to give people boxes. And so we'll ask the leader, hey, well, drop your structure for us. And I had one like drawing up a structure, and like geometrically, it hardly made sense. There was no way his team could get their hearts and minds around, this is the space that I own. And then they can never move then to the roles, because the roles, it's like with my wife, tell me what you want to be happy. Well, I want to fulfill this role well, right? That's what we're aiming for. So we got roles, we got structure, we got vision. What's that last piece?
Yeah. And the last one is the right people, right? So this is where we transform strategy into operational excellence. And, this is the most important step. We have now aligned our vision, our structure, and our roles. We have to continue the alignment to generate maximum leverage with having the right people. So what is it about? Let's just say we're dealing with someone who wants to do everything right. Like there's no mindset gap or disbelief in a leader that we're working with. How do they get this right? Right. So what this means is that you've got tools in place that are going to help you truly understand whether or not the individual you're looking at has the ability to, and there's lots of ways that we can help folks think about this, but they have the ability to execute the tasks, bring the competencies and develop the competencies, and fulfill the responsibilities of the role that we have designed. How do you know what's in the heart and mind of that individual that you're looking at to let you know that they're going to be successful at a 90% rate or greater? Because at the end of the day, we want to build teams that are full of A players. We don't want any B players or C players on that team. Now, is that realistic? You know what? I don't mind having B players. A B player for me is someone who's at this level and they're working toward that level. Love those folks. The C and D players, forget about it. A C player is somebody at the B level who's working in the opposite direction, and the D players, forget about it. So how do we have a team of all high performers on it? And the first thing you have to do in your mind is understand that it is possible. You don't have to have a team of 10 people where 2 are top performers, 7 are mediocre, and 1 is a dog. Get rid of them, right? They're just not interested. It doesn't have to look that way. They can all be top performers. That's the first thing to get through your mind and to believe in. Now, how do you evaluate folks to make sure that you're going to connect them to the right role? Real important lesson here.
The first I have a question for you real quick.
Yeah,
Can I ask this before you get into the lesson?
Yeah.
Will you remember? I'll remember lesson.
Absolutely.
Do you think if they're not a fit here, they're a C player, can they be an A player somewhere else?
Absolutely.
And I'm not trying to throw you a softball. I really want to know what you believe on that.
No, I think the idea that most leaders have that I'm going to release you from your obligation or your commitment to me and let you go find your real truth and what your calling is, that's a very fair and realistic thing to do. Too often employees are not willing to take that step because they live in fear of losing their job, and there's all these things that they're considering that might cause them to not be able to pay the bills, et cetera. At the end of the day, the leader has to understand their obligation. Their obligation is not only to the organization and their commitment to the organization, but their obligation is to is based on the commitment they've made to all their team members.
Yeah.
And if you have the vision, the structure, and the roles identified, and you create a covenant with an employee that says, are you prepared to fulfill the obligations of this role? And are you prepared to live up to the expectations that we have of you in this role? And they say yes, there's a covenant or an agreement there. And if they do not, and the leader has done everything the leader can to work with them to elevate them to a level of performance that is acceptable, and they haven't gotten there, then what other choice do you have?
Yeah.
To free them of that obligation, allow them to go find, something that is going to motivate them, that's going to be a better fit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if the vision's healthy and whole, the vision benefits the people. It doesn't just benefit the growth of the organization.
Right.
So the vision is the people. And then a healthy vision says, hey, you're blocked from living the fullest expression of who you are. Now they may be mad later. I've actually been surprised to find that they'll thank you if they have a moment of truth and maturity at some point, and they'll come back and go, thank you, even if they left angry. Not everybody does that, right? Some are going to resent you.
Right.
And as that happens, it redefines what an A player is. So the level keeps going up in a good
Right.
way. The advanced organization, yesterday's A is today's B.
Right.
So the
Right.
process never finishes. So
Right. And,
tell us your
and
lesson. Go ahead. You want to say something to that?
well, and just to finish up your comment there, I mean, how are you as a leader going to get better at hiring people if you don't let go of the folks who aren't a good fit and you don't continue to practice your techniques for recruiting? If you
Yep.
if you if you don't take advantage of the opportunities to upgrade your team and upgrade your own skills and your own systems for hiring, how can you ever get better?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You're not.
it's a tough thing to actually to actually feel like you're taking a job from someone, but you're really not. You're just, if you do this properly, you're simply holding yourself and that employee accountable to the covenant, the agreement that you came to when you first started working together. Here's the role. It's well defined. It fits into the structure of our organization this way. And here's the vision we're all going to hit together. And as long as you execute, right, as expected, as we've agreed, all is well. And I will
Beautiful.
do whatever I can as your leader to help train you and develop you to be there. If you've done all that and it still doesn't work, you have an obligation to yourself, to your team, and to that individual to create a change.
Yeah. I remember for me, it was like 12 years ago, and I was like, okay, I don't manage people, I manage agreements. Can we agree upon what this is about? Okay. Did you do your part? Okay. I'm managing the agreement, right? And it does remove some of the intensity of the emotion out of it.
Right.
Not, for different wiring, different personalities is easier or harder. Well, tell me what your lesson is. You're
Yeah.
about to hit a lesson.
Well, with regard to hiring people, most experts who are used to hiring, right, fall back on tools that they use that have worked for them in the past. And so we think of assessments as an important uh, data-centric tool for us to use. So I'm gonna jump in here because I think it's important to express some warnings around assessments, right? So when we think about, and again, the goal here is to create a fit or a match, a role fit between the role and the individual. How do I make that perfect fit? What you need to have is an assessment or a tool, one that's data centric. And the data that you're tracking is predictive of success. Very hard to find tools out there that are validated, predictive of success. Once you have that tool, you've got to use that tool to build your role and to help you match the right person to that role. So the first big mistake is we pick the wrong assessments. The second big mistake is that we don't use those assessments to design the role as well as to identify the right people to fit into that role. So what we've done to attack this challenge is we've worked with a local partner who has done something amazing. When you think about assessments, a lot of folks think about assessments that are, and the most popular assessments are based on personality. Personality, behavior, attitudes, all the assessments that track that kind of stuff, none of that is statistically significant or predictive of success of a person in a role. Any personality can be successful in a sales role. Any personality can be successful in a leadership role. Now, some of you might say, well, across leadership, I want to have complementary personalities so we all get together. That's great. That's not going to dictate hiring and hiring effectiveness. Personality is more about how I can understand you and communicate with you. Great. That could be considered a leverage point. But what's more meaningful is the work style that I bring to the role or the performance mindset that I bring to the role. And so what's really unique about this is that it's not personality based, it's not behavioral based. It looks at an individual's natural DNA for how they approach work, about how they execute the work they do. And we've taken this science and we've packaged it into something that we call the Growth Multiplier Index. It does two things. It looks at the success that an individual can have in any role, and then we take that metric and we leverage it across an entire team. And we can actually create a growth multiplier index for a team, and we can identify who at a natural state, who is working toward the team's overall goals and who is not. So we can use it to restructure a team that may not be operating at its full potential. We can also use it to redesign the roles of each of those players and then help the leader identify the right person, the right new person, or maybe a person to move from one position to another for that role. So the tool, the GMI, looks at the team, can look at the individual, and you can also use the data that we create, 150 data points, to redesign the role and then to create the optimum fit with the new person who will be fulfilling that role. It's wildly powerful. And what's really interesting is the assessment itself takes 5 minutes and there's only 8 multiple choice questions. So there's an incredible amount, there's a decade amount of science and research behind this in terms of understanding labor and connecting that to how people operate. It's really powerful, and it's something that we have been testing, and now we're ready to launch, and excited to do so on during today's conversation.
Yeah. I mean, as I think of an organization that went through it and took a lot of people through it, this big auto manufacturer, and how, you can look at this print up and go, oh, here's what's going on from such a small amount of data. I mean, so much insight generated from such small input when it's understood the way you're talking about it. And it's been fascinating to me to see how we can take a data-driven, logical, rational approach to something that still needs to be shaped, helped, and informed by the gut, the intuition, but this removes where the intuition or gut would hold it back. And the GMI index. I remember for me, I think I told you this a couple meetings ago, I'm forever obsessed with, it's not, you don't want to do something better than someone else is doing it because there's no impact there. How is this wholly different? Not just to be different, but in a way that something isn't working. How do we fix that? How do we fix what's broken? And clearly so many people are unsatisfied in their work. Now, what's changed is they're thankful to have a job with the economy right now. But all that to say, yeah, they're in the wrong spot, whether it's company, vision, roles, the levers, and a powerful tool, a lever. What's the Archimedes saying? Give me the right lever, I can move the world.
Right on. Well said.
When you think, because I know we're almost out of time, and we had even talked about doing some chat today, but we're not going to be able to do that. That's okay. I want to respect people's time. Maybe we can hang around for a minute afterward. And I'll probably mess this up, but we're going to be sending out an invite for people that come to these sessions that we're doing and give them an opportunity to participate and get insight from the GMI index, the Growth Multiplier Index. I want to tell them about something we're going to be doing. But before I do that, anything else on the GMI index you want to tell them when they get that email, what they need to be prepared for?
Yeah, I think here's the thing. Most folks look at hiring as a dark art, right? It's some mystery that they can never figure out. Get past that. Give yourself a chance to experience the 150 data points and what they can mean to evaluating a team and helping to really empower the individuals on your team to be operating at their best. Imagine being a role player on a team in the wrong role, right? You have all this energy, all this knowledge, all this enthusiasm, but you're not doing something that inspires you, or you're not doing something that is the most natural fit for you. How frustrating that would be. And then think about how amazing it would feel to be in the right role, contributing at maximum value, and how good you'd feel about getting up and going to work every day. That's really the promise of this approach. And it's why we're so excited to bring it to market.
Rock on. Speaking of promise, I want to keep us on time for the promise we've made to people.
Sorry
It's
about that.
12:30. No way, dude. You gave the heart, the passion. Everyone, thank you for being here. You'll get the invite for the GMI Index. We'll be here for part 3, and I'll be talking about culture. How do you build on what Jimmy's talked about with culture? And look for something from us called Breaking Brains, Building Hearts. I don't have time to get into it now. We're going to say that we're over, but we'll hang tight here for a minute. Thanks for being here, everybody. Peace. And I think I may have a couple of questions here. Sweet.
Awesome.
I'm going to keep going. So we've officially said, hey, we've honored the time. And I'm going to open up the ability to talk here if you want. And you don't have to share anything if you don't want to, but I'll just put that up there. So we got a question here. Sam, can you define structure and the distinction between people and roles? And you can now unmute if you want to. It's up to you, everybody. You don't have to. But Jimmy, yeah, can you define structure and the distinction between people and roles? And it may have been defined a little bit as you went into that.
Yeah. So, so I think a great way to think about it is the analogy, right? Structure is the bus. It's the vehicle that's going to help us achieve the vision. The role is the seat, and the individual is the individual in that seat. What we're doing is we're getting to deeper level. We're trying to move from concept to execution. So think about the most conceptual thing is the vision. Okay, great. I've taken this direction that I want, this direction. So let's use an example of a sports team. The direction is championship, right? Or being a championship team. Okay, great. Well, what does that mean? Let's create the vision. Are we only talking about one, or are we talking about 20 years of championship performance, right? That sets the vision. And then now what's the vehicle we need to get there? The structure of the organization that we need to get there, or the structure of the team required to get there. It's a real thoughtful thing. And unfortunately, many leaders just show up with the same structure they've always shown up with, or the same limited view of the solutions they have at their disposal to solve the challenge in front of them. But the structure is really, think of organizational structure, distributed team, cross-functional team, all of these, member-led or manager-led, all of these have their advantages and disadvantages, and they have to be considered depending upon what that vision calls for. And then the roles, those are the seats that people are going to sit in. If you are not thoughtful about those roles, then you're not going to assemble the right group of people. You're going to leave some requirements out. You're going to create some gaps, and you're going to wonder why the engine isn't firing on all cylinders. And then, of course, people are really just focused on, we're just talking about folks that bring very specifically the ability to execute the tasks. They bring the competencies, and they're ready, willing, and able to step up and take those responsibilities at heart.
Awesome. Tell me also, too, question here, speak more about the elements of an effective agreement towards accountability. And then after you hit those elements, do you include termination clauses in contracts with employees to aid accountability? And I've got one thought I'll add to that, but I'll let you hit it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the biggest challenge that leaders have is their expectations oftentimes are not expressed to their people, right? We oftentimes hear leaders say it's common sense. Of course, this is what you should be doing. Well, look, if it ain't written down, it doesn't mean anything. And if you don't have quarterly reviews, which most leaders think are a pain in the ass, but I'll tell you what, every high-performing team has them. Right? What we need to be able to document and communicate and articulate exactly what our expectations are, give our partner in crime, our team member, right, the person who's going to help us get to where we want to go, the opportunity to say yes to all these things. Then together we build a strategy or a plan to make sure that it happens. And then what championship level player wouldn't want to be held accountable to the execution of that plan, right? Why wouldn't we? If we want to get better, we want to know what we could be doing to improve our performance. So it's anybody who shies away from this idea of transparency, who isn't vulnerable enough to ask for help, those people may say they want to be champions, but they're not committed to being champions. Now,
Yeah.
what can you do as a leader, though, to cultivate this? What can you do as a leader to make it harder? Very simple in the context of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And this is research that's been done. Think about communicating with a child. If you praise a child for the grades that they get, the A's that they get, and you don't praise them for the input, for the effort they gave to create the A, what you're doing is you're conditioning that individual, that child, to want the praise. So they want the praise of the outcome they create. So they're going to be less inclined to try something new. They're going to be more inclined to stick with what they know. And you're creating a fixed mindset, somebody who doesn't want to take risks because you're only looking at the outcome. If we do that for our teams and only judge them against the outcomes they create, we are fostering an organization that doesn't want to change, that isn't going to try something new, isn't going to want to risk not being praised. They're going to show up thinking they're playing a zero-sum game. Instead, if you want to cultivate an environment that embraces accountability, then hold them accountable, not just for the outcomes, but for the inputs, for the decisions they make and the actions they take that deliver the outcomes they create. Get them focused on what they're doing to improve, what they're doing to produce those outcomes, and you'll find that you'll cultivate that growth mindset, the sense in your team that says, I can learn this, I can learn to improve. Does that help?
Totally. That's awesome. Well, you hit a nuance that I can skip over because I go right to Crucial Conversations, awesome book, CPR, content pattern relationship. So first offense where a missed agreement occurred is I'm going to address the content of that missed agreement. Hey, we agreed this would happen by this date. We agreed this would happen. We agreed whatever the agreement is, that didn't happen. And I use this with my teenagers. So, and I've fired 2 of them. I've kicked them out of the house. No, the content, I'm going to address the content. Oh, it's happened twice. Now it's a pattern. Oh, it's happened more than twice. The pattern now affects the relationship. The relationship ends. The employment is terminated. You're not on this team anymore. You're in a different position. There's a boundary put up now that wasn't there. But what you're hitting on is, it's got to be, you got to hit the inputs too. It's a lagging indicator, but peer accountability is the highest measure that I know of a healthy functioning team. What you've hit with these levers are the leading indicators. The lagging indicator is if we've got a vision that we're behind and a structure and roles and the right people in place that makes sense, then the performing that happens, to use Tuckman's models of a team, can't help but generate into a mutual accountability so that if the goal line is just accountability from leader to team, that's like, hey, we made it to the 40 yards. No, I want to score a touchdown every time, all the time. Peer accountability is that goal. Awesome. Well, some of you are still hanging around. If you want to type up a question, I can hang around for a few minutes. I've got a call coming up or video conference, but I want to address any of those. And if I don't see any pop up, I'll tell you about Breaking Brains, Building Hearts, and then we'll sign off. Okay, so since you're here, I'll just tell you real quick. Jimmy and I are going to be doing a live stream on LinkedIn once a week, and we hope to launch it as we get approved by LinkedIn. You got to get approved to do live streams, where we're going to be showing up to break brains and build hearts. And it's our opportunity where we're going to have an informal show up, hang out, chat. Where are we winning? Where are we losing? Where are we feeling stuck? What's inspiring us? Who knows what we're going to talk about? It's going to be leadership. It's going to be business. It's going to be our growth pursuits. I'm looking around at my desk and I may share little tips of things that help me. And I know Jimmy's going to do the same. Jimmy, anything you want to add on that? And then we'll be signing off.
Yeah, it'll be, it's us at our most honest and truthful. So when I think of that, I'm going to
come one button down for just breaking brains. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think about this idea of authenticity, vulnerability, transparency, and accountability. And we're going to bring all of it to the table on Wednesdays, not just to have a conversation and to maybe find a way to reach the folks that are on listening with us with just 1 or 2 ideas. And every time you and I do this, we learned something new about ourselves. So it's going to be a great opportunity for us to sharpen our saw.
Get it going on Hump Day. So Wednesday mornings is when we plan to do that. You'll hear more about it. So part 3 for Growth Multiplier Mindset, we'll be talking about culture. I'll be sharing a template. I got the dry erase board back there on culture. So you can take everything Jimmy shared on these levers and add the culture to that. Oh man, it's going to be fun.
It's going to be awesome.
Hey, thanks everybody for being here. It's a privilege. We value your time and your attention, and peace and love, everyone. See ya.